Welcome to Cursed. I am Bones or Josh, and I'm joined today by a special guest who you've probably heard on the live stream. I think that's when you were on.
It was. I was on the live stream for a little while. I did the Piccolo story.
Yes. So this is my brother Clayton,
Hello.
and today this is Familiars Part 2. And what we're going to be talking about, if you've not listened to Familiars Part 1, you should go do that. Um,
Absolutely great episode.
it was a few months ago. I think it was in the spring this year. And I kind of described like what a familiar was, what to expect. I mentioned Ava a little bit. Um, I did not go back and listen to it, so if I told the origin story, I'm going to tell it again on today.
Mm.
And then you're here because you have a very similar relationship in working. It's a little bit more recent than mine, even though it's been around for a while. With your familiar, and we want to get into kind of like how we discovered them, how we kind of discovered each other had one, which was weird because we didn't like um what was it? We didn't talk about it beforehand. This was just something we kind of came to when you started talking about the path and wondering about it. Which you could share on here too a little bit because I think it's kind of tied into that. But
Oh, I'll absolutely talk a little bit more about like my first step into witchcraft and learning about it and the changes it made on my life and the changes and realizations and new perspectives that my familiar was able to offer me after I had more formally met her. Um,
which was kind of weird because before we really get into like the thick of it, it's kind of opposite where I had these interactions with mine before I knew she was a familiar, and then you had kind of being led to the path or finding the path yourself. You were kind of like, now there's this thing here,
mm.
right?
So I will absolutely talk about what I believe it was her interactions with me before I really knew she was there at all. Um, it's it's something I'll get into absolutely, but I think that showing off and talking about the origins and starting from the beginning is going to be a lot easier for people who don't really know what familiars are like to understand because when talking to a few of my friends about it, they just they want to know more about the idea and what it's like, just the day to day. What is it like having a familiar? Why are they there? Why do they exist? So I guess whenever you're ready, we can jump into it.
Well, so this is as I guess as a like a statement before we start. Like
Mm.
this is not going to be. I think there we'll get into like the theory of like if this is something to do with the fact that we're related, or does it have something to do with the deities that we connect to, having similarities.
Oh, so many synchronicities to do with that.
Right, and so my thing is this is not the end all be all of what a familiar looks like, sounds like, acts like. You know, we're pretty adamant in the fact that a familiar is not a pet that you just go buy from a pet store. I
Mm.
mean, we all have those people that we know that had a pet kind of like appear in a time they needed them. They're very interested in witchcraft. They kind of help. Maybe they're good like helpers, but those are more on the lines of a imp type spirit. Like they're helpful, and that's not to say that your familiar spirit can't inhabit an animal or can't, you know, come in and out of that animal's kind of like consciousness or using, you know, their control. I would imagine an animal has to give them permission, just like kind of we do. But this isn't the, oh, I have a pet cat, so that cat is my familiar. That's not what a witch's familiar traditionally is, and that's not how we look at it. I guess you could certainly call your animal a familiar, but that's not, we're not here to talk about pets. We're here to talk about non corporeal spirit entities. Some have been human in a past life, some might be people's ancestors. Um, as you'll find, like mine's a daemon, a very earthly spirit. I think she's tied to Hecate a lot with kind of that like chthonic spirit form, whereas yours is a different vibration. Yours is similar. She wasn't a human spirit. This isn't an
Mm.
ancestor that we know of. This is a very different.
She has and always will be a spirit of nature, or more commonly referred to as a nymph, very closely tied in with the Fae. Her name is Clara. And oh man, I just can't wait to get into all the meat of this.
Right. So to start, let's say kind of like a little quick few minute recap of like what kind of led you to the path in a summary. Because I remember I always thought you had a like you were leaning that way, but I never wanted to feel like I was like pushing or encouraging something other than just you finding something naturally.
Oh yeah. I feel like it's never a good idea to push somebody into something like, especially when it comes to something as spiritual as witchcraft. The steps you take are always steps for yourself, and it's best to have that always be of your own volition. Like, you want to take that first step. Nobody else can do it for you. And if you're trying to let somebody else do it for you, I don't think it's going to be as genuine, because
Right. I don't even think I told you. I mean, this was back when this was maybe like, I don't know how many years ago. I mean, it was always there. Like you would come over to the house and there were maybe books or there was
mm,
stuff, but like we never, I was never like, oh, I'm a witch.
right.
I'm this and that. I think you understood that we were um, like pagan at the time, but maybe you didn't know like to the extent of that. And I never was like, this is what I am, because we come from a very religious family, but a family that's open to the paranormal, that's open to ideas of spirits. And I mean, there's people in our family that are like not really for witchcraft. They're not against it. They probably would rather us not be doing it, to be honest. But
Mm,
when you tell them about the familiars and work with these spirits, their mood kind of changed. They're a little bit like, yeah, well, I mean, I have this thing that, you know what I mean?
mm,
So I don't know how much of it is, I've never ascribed to that whole idea of, oh, you have to be a hereditary witch and bloodlines and all this shit.
absolutely
But
not.
I think there's, and maybe the listeners can like give us some insight, but it's either got something to do with the fact that we're related and we have maybe more of a sensitive, and I'm not saying that there's people that don't have familiars like ours, but I think it's the fact that we can kind of be co-possessed by them and they can kind of channel, we can channel them. Not everybody can channel stuff, and I certainly was not intending to do it in the beginning. So maybe it's a little bit of both, but or maybe it has something to do with Hermes and Hecate being followers of those and working closely with them. They send emissaries and kind of helpers. So these are all things that we're going to try to get into and talk about. And so I knew when I did familiars, I wanted to have you on and talk about your angle because it is similar. But again, that's not to say that this is what your familiar is going to act like. You might not ever channel your familiar. You might not ever hear them whisper in your ear. That doesn't mean that they're not there.
Mm.
So, okay. But back to your witchcraft thing. I'm kind of like what got you started. I just wanted to give a background on like we are from a religious family. We aren't from.
Okay. So I was absolutely raised Christian, and it was like, as soon as I was born, it was like it felt like it was already decided for me by some members of my family.
Oh,
Like,
100% it's the South.
oh yeah, and it wasn't it wasn't until I was about 13, 14 that I was really starting to look at things a little bit more critically. I always felt like it wasn't right. Something never sat right with me, with Christianity. And after digging deeper a little bit more, it just it didn't speak to me, and it felt wrong. And not to hate on Christianity or anything. There are plenty of amazing Christians out there, but it's just it was absolutely wasn't for me. And it wasn't something I could settle with and live with. So I eventually just I kind of took a personal journey for myself, and just kind of abandoned it. I didn't know what I was going to believe. but I started focusing on myself more, and that was the only place I knew where I could start. Because there were still so many questions I had about the universe, this driving curiosity that I grew up with, and just this I guess this hunger for the unknown. And
Which is weird, and not to interrupt you, but what's weird is, so that you know, you're 14 years younger than me.
mm,
When I was experiencing, this is a very parallel story. This sounds exactly like what I went through at your age, the like late teens, early 20s. And for me, you were so young at that point. Like, you had no idea what I was going through. You didn't know my path. You didn't know
mm,
all this. And then when you like just said that, I was like, I mean, this just mirrors and parallels so much of like, well, this is wrong for me. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's wrong, but I can't set. I'm not okay with this
right.
anymore, and I haven't been.
Absolutely. That's that's awesome. I mean, it just goes to show you more synchronicities and things that line up between you and I and our ways of thinking. But so it was around I think I was 16 or 17 when I sent you that text. I was just about to go into work, and I had just I was thinking about it a lot, like that weekend. I remember, like, man, I don't know enough about what Josh is into, and I mean, I of course I had visited your house on multiple occasions. I had seen the stuff, the books that you had, things that you were interested in, and it always intrigued me, but I never knew more. And the aforementioned strive to learn about the unknown, I I felt like I was always going to send that text someday, and it just happened to be this one day before I went into work.
Which is funny because I was always like, one day I'm going to get this text or a message from Clayton that's like, you're going to tell me that you're interested in witchcraft or paganism or something. I just
Mm,
could see not just so much of myself in you, but I could always see you questioning. You were never like down for the same thing. You were, if a family could have more than one black sheep, I feel like that's kind of, the path we took. And like you said, at some point you kind of, the things that maybe you didn't decide for yourself and you felt were kind of pushed on you become uncomfortable, and you take your own journey.
mm.
Like, that's all anybody can ask for. And it's a shame. I think there's a lot of people that don't do that.
Oh, absolutely. Um, I feel like people have a tendency to settle for things, even when they don't completely understand them. And while there's nothing wrong with that, uh,
I don't understand
I'm
it.
just on the other side of the coin.
Right. I'm too
Um,
inquisitive, and that quest for the unknown and knowledge and self, like, introspection. Like, I just can't understand the people who like can just be, who have never looked internally and had like this internal dialogue of like, who am I? Why do I believe what I believe? And they just go
hmm,
with it. And a lot of it is, brainwashing. A lot of it is that idea of, well, I could never question this. I had to, that was a big hurdle to overcome, the fear of hell and the fear of
oh yeah,
all of this. Even though you didn't believe in it, it's ingrained into you as this fight or flight response of like, well, what if I am wrong?
mm,
But you're like, fuck it. I don't, at some point you're like, if it's real and I'm going there, I guess I'm fucking going there, because at this point I'm not okay with this, and
right.
I'm on a search and a quest.
I mean, if you think about it, the idea and the whole factual hell that has been presented to you as a concept from the day you were born, it's it was as ingrained in fact as like bananas are yellow. So it was almost like fighting against you know, this thing that was just welded into your brain, and
I
it,
think
it takes a lot to overcome.
it might be a little bit different, very little, slightly bit different. But again, we're from an area where you're assumed to be a God fearing Christian Republican without anybody ever knowing anything about you. It's just assumed like, wait, you don't believe in God? Like, they can't, a lot of people can't fathom the idea that anybody else would stray from that. And it may sound ridiculous, but I promise you that is true. I've had so many people just, what church do you go to?
Mm.
whether they're fishing for stuff or they just assume. And then when you say, I don't, they're like, oh. And then when you kind of say, well, like, I'm not a Christian, like, the look on their faces is like, the fuck? Like, what
Yeah.
else are you, a devil worshiper? Like, there's no other, for these people, there's no other option. It's just, and like,
That's Southern baptism. Anything that is not of that thought process is of the devil, is of wrong, is
right.
wrong.
And I do think, and I mean, this isn't where this episode's going, but I think that's why Trump has such a popularity here, is because these people are easily manipulated. And if you're a Trump supporter and you're listening to this and you're pissed, you're a fucking sheep. Like, you just are. And you're in the cult, you've bought into the cult. It's never done anything for you except take and use you and take advantage of you. It's the same thing with the brand of Christianity here. And again, that's not blanketing Christianity as a whole, but in our experience and what we live in here, that is the thing. I mean, the minute they find out you're not, you're discriminated against, you're judged. I mean, if they couldn't tell I was queer in the beginning and they find out, then they freak the fuck out. It's just like, well, there's something off. But I do think there's a shift as different stuff like that becomes more open. I think people aren't necessarily to that, but growing up, that's just like, I mean, there's still parts of your family, my family, that don't know this or suspect it, and we don't really talk to them. It's because like they've bought into all this, and there's no point really in talking to them.
Right. It's like a question of, would you want to take the effort out of your day and in yourself to try to tell somebody that it's in your family that disagrees with it, just so that they know? Because there's not really any convincing them.
No,
and
you
I don't
can't.
really want to convince them either.
These are people that there's no point in arguing with. Like, when you hear the things about Trump supporters, it's the same thing. Like, you're not going to sway them. You're not going to change their thing. Sometimes you have this worry and fear of isolation, and that's what I had. But that was one thing I never worried about you. I was like, I know that he's open-minded, and even if he does stay on this path, I don't think that he would ever be so close-minded as to not, entertain other ideas or other beliefs or no beliefs, or as far as like, saying like atheistic ideas. But so you sent me that text.
Oh yes, I sent you the text, and it said something along the lines of, "Hey Josh, I've always been really curious about what you think about the world, or your, because I believe you had told me before that you were kind of vague about it. You were like, well, we're pagan, and I had asked like, can you tell me a little more about that? I just want to know more. I'm not really sure about what I think about the universe at the moment, and I really want to take this. I want to learn more about it for myself to better myself, and maybe it wasn't all about like, I wasn't all in at first. Like I just wanted to know about it at first, but part of me was like already like, yeah, this is probably something you're gonna be learning about for the rest of your life. But then I went into work, and you answered me, and I think we eventually just like we planned some time to get together so we can just talk about it in person. And after giving me like just I guess basic rundowns of like what exactly you believe and what exactly witchcraft is all about and the personal journey of it, I just tried to take all of that in, and it became like my main focus. I was like, okay, I need to learn more about this, because I had already been pretty, I guess, somewhat steeped in knowledge about different pantheons and the ancient religions of the world, and there were already gods that had like interested me and that I wanted to know more about before I had anything to do with witchcraft. And before I met Clara, I had already like seen all these lines lead up to Hermes. Like, number one, my usernames online have always been Mr. Dime. I've always had a very close connection with dimes, and I didn't really know why. Dimes had always just like appeared to me at strange times. Like if I were to find change or just like anything laying, if I were to find change on the floor, it would be like a dime. If I were to find go into my pocket and then pull out change, or it's just dimes would constantly appear, and I think Tamara has something very similar to that.
Right, with or especially at the time, like with all the mercury dimes and stuff that she was telling you about.
That was all like after.
And then after you told me that, I started seeing dimes too. It was almost like this, like,
and I didn't know mercury dimes were a thing. Like I had no idea.
Well, we had after we shared like stuff. I mean, I think I was like, you're more than welcome to borrow any book I have. I'll send you resources I know about. And it kind of just was like, find what interests you and find your way.
Right.
And at some point later, you were like, I feel like something's calling on me, but I don't really know where to start.
Oh man.
And I was like, well, tell me some of like the things you think are related. And dimes was one of them.
Dimes, the Egyptian god Thoth, or Tot, or Thoth, whichever way you'd like to say it. There is a word that I can't remember right now, but it's basically like the idea that like two different gods perceived by two different pantheons and religions, different places in the world, they perceive a god in a different way. Like just to use this as an example, Hermes and Thoth are the gods of the same exact things, and Mercury as well, Mercury being the Roman adaptation. And there's a word for it, but all these gods are like the same thing. They're perceived, this concept, they're like perceived by these different religions, but they're the same god, even if they look differently. Like Thoth, it appears as like there's a certain bird, but it's like a bird-headed man, and of course,
it's a crane. I forget the name of the crane.
It's something like a crane. It's a sort of crane, long beak.
It's a bird. It's a popular waterfowl there.
Ibis, something like
that.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe. But I didn't know about that at the time, that these gods could be the same, or like the same concept but perceived by different pantheons. And I had felt the draw to specifically Thoth and Hermes, and then I dug into it a little bit more, and I found out they're basically the same thing. And not only that, but Hermes and Hecate, we found out together, have all kinds of different relationships with each other.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to say that I'm some Greek pantheon expert, because I thought it was interesting. I had learned about some of it in school. Never heard about Hecate when I found her. Well, when I listened to the signs and they led me to that, I knew about Hermes, but I didn't know the in and outs and the connections. I knew there were some, but it wasn't until we kind of talked about it and started comparing, and I don't remember which came first. I don't know, this is like a chicken and egg thing, but when did we start talking about familiars?
It was after we were talking about the Hermes and
at some point, I don't remember, because was it something where I was telling you about Ava, and or was it something that you felt like was contacting you, and somehow we started talking about, because there were things about Ava that I experienced that I hadn't really ever told many people, I didn't think about. And then you're describing these interactions with Clara. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so used to reading it on like text and stuff as like Clara.
Yeah. But Clara, it's both fine.
It's Ava, not Ava. I don't know. But Ava. But at the same time, I was like, holy shit. Like, I can't believe you just said that, because that's exactly the same shit, like interactions.
So it was not long. Like it wasn't like there wasn't a like deciding point yet where like I was like, oh yeah, Hermes, he's my god. I'm gonna like follow him and try to do work through him. Like this that hadn't happened.
Right.
It was just I was still in the midst of learning it all. And one night, I was practicing a meditation technique that you had taught me about, where you imagine like a ball of energy in your mind, literally inside of your
I
skull.
think it was me trying to like about how like some 101 witchcraft, like how to manifest,
Right.
visualize, and build energy.
And it was the imagining that ball of energy inside of your skull, and then imagining the other one right at your core, right in your stomach, and then like feeling those two connect through your spine. Then like imagining and manifesting your spine extending throughout, like down out of your body into the earth, then wrapping around the earth's core.
Yeah, like grounding /
Oh, yeah.
meditation. Yeah.
And it's kind of difficult to do at first without falling asleep, and it's still difficult to do without falling
Right.
asleep. But it is a very it's a very nice way to step into that kind of trance state where your mind is open to suggestion and you're almost scrying with yourself and you're observing your thoughts and seeing how they affect you. And
That's such a good way. I've never thought about that before. Scrying like yourself.
yeah, it's wonderful. And I actually saw I also saw that same night another technique, because I was like just surfing the web about meditation techniques, and there was this guru that mentioned how you should not observe your thoughts as if they are you. You should see your thoughts as something, as what they are. They're thoughts. They're just things in your mind. If I think about, what if I killed someone? It's not like that's something I want to do. It's just a thought. And it's the same thing, like, if you think about something sad, you don't have to have that sad thing affect you. It's just a thought. So if you take a step back and look at it third person and see those thoughts and analyze them, you can learn a lot about yourself. And I find that it's a lot easier to do practices like that while in that trance state.
Yeah, like just because you think about murdering doesn't make you a murderer per se.
You could analyze that thought and think, so did I think about this because I want to kill that bitch coworker, or
or do I need therapy?
Right. So yeah, it was the first time I did this. It was the very first time that I went into this meditative state, that I heard this other voice. It was much more clear than like it ever had been. And I would like to get into that a little bit, how I have always, in my mind, I've always thought it was like a normal way of thinking, but whenever I have thoughts, or if I think about doing something, or if I question myself in any sort of scenario, there has almost always been this like kind of crazy immediate response in my mind. Whether I feel like I hear it with my ears, or whether it just appears in my mind like it's not like I read a sentence. It's like the thought immediately was put there by something else, like it was a conversation.
It's almost too quick, because I have this, and that was what I noticed in the beginning. It's almost this, like, it's too quick to be a thought. And if you think about it, you're like, did I make that up? Sometimes it doesn't even sound like your voice, but it's like something is responding, or having it's like an internal monologue, except you're not having it with yourself. And then you start talking, and I know we sound crazy, but then you start communicating with this thing, and you think, well, is this just another facet of me? Is this just that? And it turns out sometimes, apparently in our cases, to be something else.
Right. It's like if your stream of consciousness had somebody else talking to it. And if your stream of consciousness like hit a question, it's like something else came in and answered that immediately. it was, I just thought it was normal. But that voice manifested itself into something that felt much more real than it ever had that night that I put myself in that meditative trance. And I didn't really speak up about it much. I thought that maybe it was just me. I just,
It's exactly, yeah,
of
how
course,
I felt.
I was trying to be skeptical about it a little bit. And it wasn't until after that we started talking about Ava and familiars and discovering your familiars. And you were just basically telling me about Ava and like the effect that she can have on other people and like how she can manifest within you. And I was like, man, man, there's something here. Because I was the whole time I was just thinking back to the way I've thought my whole life and that manifest that time I meditated. And we talked a little bit about discovering the familiar and how you would go about that. And
Because originally when you told me, I thought, because it was so weird and it was stuff that I had not really seen or heard about before, I was like, it's not that I didn't believe you or question you, but at the same time, I was like, did I maybe imprint did I like maybe sway you into, like, I'm not saying that something wasn't trying to communicate, but maybe I kind of influenced you too much and you thought there's this thing here that, and that's why I didn't really like go into detail about what to expect. I didn't want you to have a preconceived idea.
Right.
I was like, you can reach out to things. I said, be prepared. It could be everything from an ancestor to a spirit guide idea to something around you. And I didn't want to give too much away of like what I experienced with Ava, because I didn't want to lead you and your experiences into something that either one of us could go back and look at and say, oh shit, did I just feel that because I was expecting it?
Right.
And that's why just kind of doing like normal stuff is like, I don't think, I think it's a detriment to both parties if I were to tell you like this is how it happens and make it come off like that's the only way it happens, because that robs you of your own personal experience, and you want to go in unbiased and not have a preconceived idea of this is what it's gonna what's gonna be, and as it happens you kind of think, well, this is weird, and then
Exactly. It's very well put. And trust me, you were definitely vague. And that's the biggest challenge about it, is because whenever I want to explain some of this stuff to some people, it's not like I never want to be so matter of fact about anything, because it's so personal and it's so individual based. And
even Ava at the time was like, yeah, I'm not going to tell this motherfucker how it is.
Like if you are, I truly feel like if you are going to meet something, you will. And it doesn't, sure, there can be people that can help you and can build up your knowledge about things so you're more readily prepared. But I feel like if you have some kind of like guardian angel, spiritual type entity attached to you, it will make itself known at some point in your life, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. And I did feel like it was destined to happen, and I had thought, like, I had that thought, like, does this only exist because you had told me about it, so then I came up with this myself? But after going back and just I guess cross-referencing my past, it just all feels like it makes sense, and it feels like it's right. So I suppose I should talk about the night.
Yeah, you said you kind of felt that, and then we talked about that. So then your connection, right? That was the next step.
Right.
Was you were like, I was like, well, maybe there is something there. I don't know. Don't get discouraged if there's not, kind of thing. And then
Oh, and definitely be skeptical as well. You were telling me a lot about that. But I think that more came after I'd met her and told you about it, because you were like now be make sure that this is this is who she says she is.
Right. And I mean, like, I think, yeah, Ava was even like, I'm going to like, because you told me you were going to do that meditation that night. And Ava's like, well, I'm going to go in the background and kind of like just keep an eye on shit because you're brand new. You seem to have this like ability to channel things. We found out later with doing like a seance, like you channeled something on a Samhain. But that'll be for something else. But yeah,
Right.
we were thinking, well, you want to be open enough to receive stuff, but you're also newer at this and you're putting your feelers out into the great unknown. And Ava's a little protective and always has been of you. So it's like, well, I'm going to make sure that nothing fucking
Right.
comes through that doesn't need to, or I'm going to like,
Take things with grains of salt and don't let your mind be so open that it spills.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, that night I went into the trance again, and it was about, I mean, I lost track of time. I was going to try to give a time frame, but I don't know how long I was in this for. But I remember I literally felt something on my skin, and it felt like a like a warm hand, and it went up my side, and then there was another hand that went up my other side and stopped at my shoulder. And I remember it was like I was alone in my room, lights completely off, some candles were on, and it was like I was transported to another world. It was like the scenery around me had changed to like a whole different, like nothing was physical, and everything was like up to you. It was like it felt like I could change the environment around me just by thinking about it. And I saw her in front of me, and I asked her name, and she replied Clairval, and that was it. It was an immediate response, like ringing in my head, in my both of my ears, Clairval, like, and I had even seen. I felt like I could see the word itself as well, and I had never heard that name. I never knew it existed, but it was like Clairval, Clairval, and she had white hair, red eyes, and it was like she was floating in front of me, and it was something like it was completely out of body. It was like living in a dream. And after speaking with her just very briefly before, I felt like I was yanked out. I just had to like sit there for a while and just kind of think, what the hell was that? Because I had never experienced anything even close to something like that. And it was it's hard to even go back to that moment, the very first moment I had that interaction, but it just felt like magic. And I hope that I hope that everybody gets to experience something like that at some point in their life.
Well, what's weird is like, of course, that's not really how mine went, but what's weird is that, like, you know, I'm like, don't get discouraged, but you were able to get this mindset, to this like meditative state, this altered state so easily. And I'm not saying that you weren't like maybe subconsciously practicing throughout your life. I felt like I had too, but I was like impressed. I was like, oh, that's great. And, you know, part of me was like, well, I just want to make sure like he's doing this, but not as a gatekeeper, like doing this right. But I want to make sure that he's not, you know, because and maybe that's part of my self-reflection. Like there's parts where I don't want to get carried away with stuff and I'm skeptical of,
right,
because I don't want to influence myself to create an experience. So I was like, okay, well, you know, what'd you do? Because I wanted to make sure you didn't like, you know, and again, that sounds really shitty. Like I'm not trying to say I was questioning you, but I wanted to, it's like figure out, without leading you at all, figure out
right,
what experience you had, just to see like, well, was your subconscious playing tricks on you? Did you
Mm.
have this like alter, but it was just this curiosity.
With experiences like that, and thoughts about the unknown, and these crazy concepts, like of course you're going to like take a step back and be like, what even of this was real? What did I make of this? And it's it's hard to shoot those thoughts down until you go back and look at all the connecting lines and
Hmm.
the things that just make sense.
Yeah, I know people say hindsight's 2020, but when you actually look and you can see this thread that's been like woven throughout your life and these little
Mm.
things that pop back and you can say, and I think that's where some of the craziest like parallels to how Ava and I responded when you told me your interactions. I was like, shit, now I know I'm not leading him because there's no way he would have fucking known this. Nobody knows this except me and Ava.
I remember that conversation where I was like, it was after I had connected with her a few more times, and I described to you like my way of going about speaking with her and having her appear to me. It was like, I would like create this room in my mind after going into that trance, and like it would made it easier for me to insert myself into a plane where I could exist with her and see her through my own eyes. And you were like, I had never told you anything about that, but that's actually like a really common practice or something like that.
Right. And I was like, this
Like creating a
motherfucker
room.
is just naturally coming. And I mean, I was like happy for you, a little bit jealous because I was like, fuck, mine did
Mm,
not go this way. Um, but no, I think there was something to be said about like the similarities with R. And I was like, well, that would make sense because Hermes shares that too with that emissary idea of sending. But then I look back and I'm like, okay, there's definitely evidence for me in my personal practice and meditations and things like that
mm,
that shows that Ava, and it's a knowing, has been there way before this life and before Hecate and before all this. So
right.
I don't know how long Hecate or what I perceive as Hecate now was connected in the past, but
Mm,
I do want to point out that we're saying the familiars' names. I don't really share her Ava sigil that often, but I do give out her name because like some people, and I think it depends on the familiar, it depends on the practitioner. If you don't feel comfortable giving out a name, if they don't want you to give out their name or their sigil, then please don't. Um, or you could even give them a code name. For Ava, she's like, well, nobody's just going to summon me just because they want me to. Like, first off, what's in it for me?
mm,
Where some people have the idea that a familiar can be forced into doing something for somebody else if they have a name. Some people, it's just such a personal connection. They'll say they have a familiar, but they won't really go into like much detail of names or look or appearance or anything because it's guarded and to each their own. And I mean, you're talking about a mutual relationship. It has to be okay with the familiar too. I'm not gonna be out here outing Ava if she didn't like the recognition and kind of the attention, and if to her it's like that just helps feed me with energy and a foothold on this side. But that's what I was going to say is just because we're talking about it doesn't mean if you have one that you have to share their name. Again,
right.
that's
Right.
something that you should discuss with your familiar and get a feeling for and understand that if you don't want to share that information or they don't want to be known about or they don't want to be talked about, that is valid too.
Absolutely.
Um,
It's all extremely personal and very individualistic, and everything that it has to do with you is everything that you and your familiar are comfortable with, and you don't have to try to make your experience mirror ours at all.
right.
It's all you. But I did also want to mention. You probably noticed that I said Clairval instead of Clara, and Clairval was the first name that Clara gave to me, and it was again, like I said, I had no idea this was even a name, and it just sounded completely wild to me. But then she also said, I am also Clara. So I looked up the name Clairval, and it's a French name that is like very rare. And then I found out later that I'm like 50% French, so that's really weird. Um, but the thing about the names with Clara is that she's actually androgynous. There, she's pretty much both sexes, and she may appear more feminine or more masculine, depending, I guess, on how I feel. Because I'm bisexual, but I'm. It's still a little unclear to me how that really works. But I did find out later that Hermes and Aphrodite once got together and made Hermaphrodite, who is both sexes, and Clara being a wind nymph that is very closely related to Hermes, because in the mythology, it's like Hermes in his free time would spend much of it with nature spirits, forest nymphs, all different kinds of nymphs, and I believe Clara is likely at least an adaptation or a descendant or some kind of spirit having to do directly with that, but also having a close relationship to Aphrodite. Thus, the hermaphrodite sort of connection is there.
Which I mean, that's where, the term God, and that, of course, that doesn't mean somebody that's like gender fluid. That doesn't mean somebody who's non-binary.
Right.
That is on a literal sense of like, there are people who are born with both pairs of sexual of
Reproductive
organs, yes, in one form or the other, and that's kind of where that name came from. But I think that the Greeks, or I think at least in that lore and that kind of idea in the mythology, maybe kind of pointed to the idea of like maybe a gender fluidity, that there was that kind of androgynous, like it doesn't matter. There could be both masculine, feminine, and any combination of those in between that appears and kind of comes to that. And I thought that was so interesting, because what you'll hear is that these they're known as spirit familiars, demon spirits, fairy lovers, demon lover. And it's this idea that there's a soulmate connection, or like the other half of you. Some of it says it's tied to your soul, and so they're bonded to you in a way, and so they typically appear to be what you're attracted to, especially the gender that you're attracted to. Sometimes you're attracted, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's not, doesn't even factor in, but there are times where, and like I said, I have Ava who kind of appeared, but you have to think like these maybe is a form they maybe chose to take, or this is a form that they enjoy because there is that like deeper kind of level. And it's strange to me, because that, and we just kind of tied that to that, the being bisexual, and that maybe that has something to do with it. But then you have the other idea that it's connected to Hermes and stuff, and how even Hermes was described as androgynous. And so it's one of those things that I thought was odd, where it's like that kind of attraction viewpoint that people talk about with the familiar spirits being there. So like, if you're gay, you're gonna see, per se, your familiar spirit might come to you as that. Maybe it's just, I mean, I have people whose familiar spirits take the form of a dragon or a wolf. Like, so there's instances where that's not the case. Like, again, this is all very different and personal. It depends on the spirit, where they're coming from. But, there's this attraction to Ava. And it's funny to me is because usually there's that, like, you can say that there's this sexual component, there's this romantic component, and that does really help in spell work, especially when you're working with a spirit that goes along those lines. And we can get in more depth of that later, but I mean, you start talking about sex magic involved with your familiar, and it's not what it sounds like. You're not having sex with your familiar, just saying. But like, there's that energy and this buildup that like I think that they use or they feed off of, it helps strengthen the connection when you get into those deeper like ideas of magic and a soulmate. I'm using air quotations.
Podcast.
Right. So, but like that's the thing with Ava. Like and it's not been for the longest time. I used the label straight because I was like, well, I'm mostly attracted to. I'm passing. It is what it is. I guess that's the label for me, and it never fit. And it wasn't until this year that I was like, I had a separation and all that, and I'm like, this is something that I felt like I needed to address with myself was like, I'm not gay, but I also have never felt right identifying as straight. Why am I holding this label? It's only because I feel like that's what I should be. It doesn't feel right to me. Queer felt better because it felt like I don't really care. Like, I mean, but Ava is somebody that has appeared, and especially when I was younger, I mean, like, has always been that attraction. So I think that's something to look out for. Again, it's a personal thing. If you Google and you look at some of the sites and some of the information there's a lot of information that points to that throughout the shit. Like so I don't think it's as easy because some say it's the opposite sex. It's not as easy as that. But I do think there's this connection to like that, what you're attracted to.
Right.
And they're attracted to you. But I will say I've channeled Ava 100 times. She is definitely not attracted to the male species, as it were. She's definitely, if a demon could be a lesbian, I guess that's what you would call, because that's, but so there's just, it's all personal, it's all different. It doesn't mean that your demon is gay. It doesn't mean that your demon is even going to care about the sexual attraction part of it. So we did a quick pause because there was like some background yard or landscaping being done. It might still be in the background, but sorry about that, but we do have to continue. So that was basically your story. We won't get into, because this has gone over, we won't get into how to work with them. We'll record another one right after this, and then I'll post that in a couple weeks so that there's going to be like another part. So part 2 and part 3 back to back. So my story was a little bit different. I probably at that age, so I was probably about 16, 17 when I started hearing like what you described, that response to internal monologue to thoughts would get a response back. And I'm like, oh shit, what the fuck is this? And the only thing I really knew at the time was Christianity. I mean, I had researched witchcraft, always had, I guess, a fascination with it. Of course, you're like, oh, I can't think about this, can't read about it, I can't talk about it because that's how the devil gets in. But I was already kind of moving away at that point, like kind of looking at Christianity, in my experience, as nothing that ever did anything for me. So I'm hearing this voice kind of thing, and I think, oh God, am I like fucking possessed or some shit? And I don't even know what that was. So anyway, I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm like trying to ignore it. I'm trying to think I'm like crazy. I'm like, there's no way I'm hearing this thing. I would have dreams and I would see this figure. And the only thing I could think of looking back was like, at the time, I did not have a good home life. I was kind of like, I felt ostracized kind of by myself. The other brothers that were older, like, I lost that connection with them. I didn't really have one. And it's your family, but my step family, like, did not have a good relationship with them. So I kind of felt alone. And I remember I would go out into the woods and what I would call meditation now. Then I just thought, I'm just being one with nature. Even then I didn't even think of it like that.
Just getting away. Right.
And it was kind of like I was in this place where I was maybe asking for something to help, even though I wasn't conscious of it. So in comes this like voice and these figure, and I'm like, God, I'm fucking possessed by a demon or some shit. And it would be like, you know, it would be like, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm like, what the fuck? And it was a female voice. So then I go from these thoughts and these feelings of like, because I didn't know then. I'm like, why do I have this female voice in my head? And, do I have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder? Because I was looking up stuff, and like trying to figure out. And I'm like, no, it doesn't make sense. And so early college years, um, it's still there. And if I was making it up, why would it still be there when I didn't want it? Like, it was kind of driving me a little bit crazy. And I would have these times where I didn't know. I would go out and do stuff with friends. They would show me pictures of like, I don't remember doing that. I felt like this thing was taking over and I didn't have like memories of it. And so I'm thinking, well, this is mental illness, of course. And I've always battled depression and anxiety and stuff. So I thought, well, okay. So that's where I started, was like, what is this in terms of something mental? I even talked to a doctor about it, and they're like, you just don't really seem to fit. I'm not sure. Like, you don't really fit the profile of somebody that might have alternate personalities and DID and stuff like that. So, I mean, I was on message boards, like forums and stuff, like trying to just make sense of this, talking to other people. And while it's like a good, I guess, community of people is what you would call it, and people that, unfortunately, can function with this, you know, with DID, and other people who can't. And it's just like going back and forth. And I'm like, I just don't feel like I fit with this. I made friends that had DID and stuff, and made friends with their alters, as you would call them. And even at the time, Ava made friends with them. But, that's kind of what started that. I got a little bit ahead of myself. What started that was I was working on that book, and I may have mentioned it before, about like how to be like telepathic, how to like see spirits. It was just this book I found with like kind of like instructions on how to scry and do stuff. And I had never heard about this, like scrying and stuff. So I tried one of the little techniques, and at the time I didn't think it was related at all. And it was like you would draw a black circle on a white piece of paper, and you would stare at it, and you were trying to shut your conscious off and build a bridge to your subconscious, so that maybe these subconscious messages would come through, or you could scry the future, or you could, all this stuff. And I've always been a little bit like, what do they call it? Like, where you can kind of predict.
Clairvoyant?
It's like, I get these insights, or like these, it's like intuitions, and,
almost like you're seeing hints of the future,
right?
And then it makes sense looking back.
Yeah, like they don't play out like a movie, like a premonition, but kind of like something like that.
I know what you mean.
Right. So I mean, I'm like playing around with this stuff, and I do that, and it's like this fucking door was opened all the way now, and I could communicate with her in a way that I couldn't before. And a friend at the time who was talking to me about it was like, well, have you tried asking its name? And I was like, no, no. And so I did, and I got the name Ava. It's a very popular name now, but back in the early 2000s, I didn't know anybody by that name. I just didn't. It wasn't a name that was on my radar, but it felt familiar to me. No pun intended. And I'm like, fuck. So I look it up, and for some reason, which now if you looked it up, I can't fucking find anything about it, but when you looked up the meaning of Ava, it meant voice. And I was like, no, like, this is fucking crazy. And I was agnostic at the time, and I'm like, this is maybe just a personality of mine, a facet. There's something, wires were crossed in my brain or whatever. And fast forward in time, I've learned to live with Ava. I let her, like, I channel her. She comes out and takes over. It's like she was learning how to be human in a way. And I always thought it was a joke that she was like, oh, I'm a demon and blah blah blah, and it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. This is just some made up bullshit in my head, right? And it's hard to describe like the feeling when you don't have control over, like I mentioned in the last episode of Cursed, which is on Hex Files, which go to Hex Files to listen to that last Cursed episode if you missed it and was wondering where that was. It's over there, but I mentioned out of body experiences, and that's what it was like when Ava would take over or channel, and it felt like being a passenger. Someone would take, you'd be in the back seat, she would take over the wheel, and for better or worse, sometimes worse, she would take control, and like she would be out and around certain friends that it was almost like she didn't know at the time, but was like kind of feeding off of them. And she had always been vampiric to me. I saw her, I'm like, she's got fangs, she looks like fucking the undead, you know what I mean? Like it's just
What was that? Underworld protagonist? I
yeah,
think it was.
yeah, Underworld, with it's like Kate Beckinsale. But what's funny is she does resemble that, especially in the beginning. But when I saw her at first and was interacting with her, that movie had not come out.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing like a commercial for, and being like, "What? Whoa, whoa, that's very similar." Like the dark hair, pale skin, like eyes that are like more like crystal slash like a very icy blue.
Hmm.
Um,
Piercing.
yes, and sometimes it would be like this kind of a yellow, like a bright yellow. And so I'm like, okay, and I did think that was weird because I'm like, well, I'm just making this up, and I was like, but I've seen this in dreams and visions before I even knew this movie was even a thing, and I'm
Oh, yeah.
like, okay, and so, but along those lines, to get a picture and an idea of what she looks like, um, not the same but similar, you know, and so, sorry, and so I've built this bridge somehow and this connection. I get this name. I'm going about my life and hers, and fast forward to the story of when I met like Hecate was trying to get rid of a ghost, and Ava had always been like, I want you to go towards. I want to be not me. She was like, I want to do witchcraft. I want to explore it more, and I'm like, no, I just don't know. Like I mean, back in the day, I believed it, but I don't know if I really believe all that now. And kind of pushing towards it the whole time. Like,
Hmm.
well, she wouldn't say I'm a witch, but it's like, well, I can do this. You could do it too. So I'm like, okay, when I'm trying to get rid of this ghost in the house that's bothering the dogs, I'm like, okay, I don't really know what to do with this. And I Google and blah, blah, blah. Like, I've said it before on other podcast episodes, but Hecate's name pops up for some reason. I start, and I'm just looking at like how to cleanse a house. And at this point, I'm like Ava's all for this, right? And she doesn't say she knows anything about Hecate. She doesn't tell me, but I've always got the feeling that she knew more. And here I thought it was like my subconscious that knew more that wasn't telling me. And I'm like, okay, Ava knows more than she's telling me, but there's a reason she's not telling me. So after that, she gets quiet, and I'm like I can kind of feel her, hear her, but not like before. And I'm like, oh shit, she's gone. Did this have like was this a part of Hecate that was like a guide,
Hmm.
and has gone back? I don't need it now. And I'm like, that's kind of bullshit because like it's like losing a loved one, a partner, somebody like very close to you, a family member, and you're like, I just can't contact him anymore. So I go about witchcraft and exploring that, learning that, and it was probably she would be here and there, like like faint, just faint experiences, like hearing her voice when I'm falling asleep, like outside of my ear, whisper, and I'm like, oh shit, or having a dream, and I'm like, she doesn't channel me like she used to. I don't understand. And I can't get hold of her. You know what I mean? Like I'm reaching
Mm-hmm.
out and I can't. And so like for this goes on for like a year or two. And this is something that's been with me since I was 15 and I'm like, 20 like 10 years at that point. And I'm like, where is she? So I continue onward with witchcraft and at some point I'm talking to somebody and we're talking about witchcraft and all this and it's like, well, Hecate can sometimes send emissaries blah 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 and I'm at that point I'm like okay I don't think that's right I just I'm not sure and at some point I come across the idea of a spirit familiar and I'm like is and it kept nagging at me and I'm like no why would I have a spirit familiar before I even became a witch? That doesn't make sense to me. But I was desperate at the time because I'm used to having this being this spirit, this demon talk to me and I don't have it anymore. And I was like, okay, this is great. This is fucking ironic as shit. I didn't want it for like the first 10 years. I was like, I kind of wish this would go away. Maybe not the whole 10 years, but the first little bit while it was like, it was not fun. Like, it was confusing. It was scary. It was not, I felt possessed.
Mm.
And I guess in a sense, I kind of was. And then I decided, well, I'm going to reach out to her in this idea of a spirit familiar. And I didn't really expect much, but I thought, fuck, maybe. And I started like, it was weird. I started getting like hits, and it was like that feeling again of like more energy. But I would, I started seeing and hearing her again, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't like inside my head anymore. It was external. And it felt like reaching out and trying to communicate with something. It's almost like, to me, it feels like, let's say you had a roommate and you lived with them and, or a loved one or a partner or whatever, you lived with them and then they moved out or they were kicked out. You don't know why, you don't know how they were removed. And then you had to search for them and you find them, but they don't necessarily, they're not inside that place anymore. You have to call them and, it's like build this relationship again.
Mm.
And she felt different. She felt more whole. And I couldn't just know her thoughts anymore the same. She couldn't know mine. It was like having to talk with this external thing. And it was familiar though. So it wasn't like, okay, I don't feel like there's a spirit getting one over on me, acting like her or pretending. Like, I mean, it was familiar. There was things that had always been there. So she came back in that sense. And, I'm working with her differently then. And I'm like, well, do you have a sigil? And like almost automatic writing style, she draws this thing. And I'm like, oh shit, like the sigil. And I don't really share the sigil, but to put it one way, it contains like the letters of her name, but it also looks like fangs. And what's crazy is I did not sketch things till I thought it looked cool. It just came out of me. And I was like, well, maybe I can channel her again. Maybe, this is something. So I tried all the things like sending her, which we can get into on like trying to send a familiar. Made a little altar place for her. I would leave her offerings and it would just get stronger and stronger. And I treated her like a spirit now, not a personality shard, not a thing that was in my brain, but as something separate. And that's what made that bridge. And the relationship's even stronger now. She doesn't channel me 24/7 like before, but there are a lot of channeling. It takes a lot more energy this way. And the best thing that we've come to decide, again, I still feel like she knows more, was like, why did you go? What happened? And it was kind of like the best resolution I've come up with this from her, from me, from visions, from meditations I've seen with her, I've tried with Hecate, is that she was not by her choice, but she was removed from me. She was only, I was only like a vessel for her. She was given to me as this familiar, is what I gathered. She was not her complete entire form with inside me, but she was a fraction of herself. However, she could communicate with me. She had her own likes, dislikes, but she became more and more complex, it seems like. And when I found Hecate and connected with her, she was removed from me. As in the bet, like again, the best I can come up with, and what it feels, and what she's kind of alluded to is, if I had been around, you would have not had the experience that you needed to have with your own self power. Like, not that I used her as a crutch, but I would have looked to her for help in witchcraft and the path and communicating with Hecate. And it's almost like Hecate needed me to see that I can do that myself and that I don't need a bridge. It doesn't hurt, but it was like, this is going to stunt your growth as a witch if you have this familiar. But it's not only that, but she was removed so that she could be almost like prepared or have information downloaded or like learn how to come and work with me as a separate entity now. Because it's almost like she kind of knows what was before, but doesn't really. I mean, I found out for sure that she was not a human before. She's very underworld-esque, not like the movie, but like underworld, chthonic. I joke that she's a triple Scorpio because if that like relates to her energy to kind of give you a feel of like who she is. She's got a heavy presence. We'll talk about that more in the next episode, like what they feel like, what they look like. I mean, you kind of described, but
I could go into more detail.
Right. And I think that helps for the people that have never experienced one or might question they have one around them, to give them like what we perceive. But that was the journey up until this point, was working with her as a separate entity and trying to build a bridge with her as a witch and a familiar, as one soul to another being or spirit that have done this before in some sense in past lives. And I've had past life regressions with her that I don't know how much information I get, but she kind of either blocks or shows me something else. And I don't know if I talked about it, but maybe I can get to it in the next one more when we talk about meditations and stuff. And again, if I've said this stuff before, it's because I don't remember. I've never gone full in on talking about her. This is her time of year, so she may channel more that, you know, it's like talking, but she'll channel, she'll talk, she knows how to text. She's using my body as this kind of like, you know, vessel for her here, but then it also feels like she can, and I'll get into that in the next one, but that's basically how I came to know her and how our relationship went from there's a demon in my head and I'm going crazy to this is an actual working relationship and a partnership that, you know, is like a witch and a familiar spirit. And I've had people tell me, oh, well, it's a fetch. Like, I don't buy that. Why did I create this fetch? I didn't try to. I sure as fuck didn't try to when I was 15. And a fetch is something that a witch can create and send to do their bidding, basically, or help with spells and stuff. But
it's a lot like what's that, the topor or the topals?
Shit, now I can't think of it. The tulpas.
Tulpa.
Yeah, it's like a thought form.
Yeah.
That has enough energy to give it life. But the idea of fetches are, you don't want them running around. Like, you don't want them to have a life of their own, because they are connected to you and somebody can. That's a whole different story. But I think that may be a good place to end this episode, because it is like going on an hour and 20 minutes. Those were kind of like a background of yours. Absolutely. How you kind of came to yours. And the next one, we'll talk about Ava and Clara more individually and kind of like how we work with them, how we see them day to day, and the similarities that we've kind of gathered, and maybe in similarities to other familiars that we might know. So this wasn't supposed to be there was supposed to be a 1 and a 2 for now, but now there will be a 1, 2, and a 3. So it's literally the the Familiars episode is literally the most downloaded, not overall, but the most downloaded in the shortest amount of time. I mean, it's got more downloads than some of the original episodes, or it's tied with them. And those have been out for a year. And it's like, there's definitely an interest in this. So I don't think anybody's going to complain that there's even more information on this.
I mean, it's just such a deep subject. I mean, I feel like it's only natural for it to have to end up being 3 parts.
And that was the original idea. But when everything happened and I kind of made it guest driven, I was like, actually, part 2 could be just having you on with me and discussing to kind of give a view. And then you're somebody who's not been practicing as long as me. And not that that matters, because I've learned a lot from you and your experiences, but how your relationships might be different with your familiars out there, for who's listening, who might have just started one, who might listen to this and connect with one, or for those who have been listening and maybe we have an experience that's what I'm all about. Is there's something I might have done that would help somebody else, and I want to hear other people's stories, because there's always more ways to learn and connect with these things.
You never stop learning.
Exactly. So with that being said, we're gonna stop this episode. We're gonna start recording the next one, and you'll have to wait a week or 2 weeks to hear that one. But again, it'll be out. It just makes it easier on everybody if it's not 2 hours, especially me, and it's broken up. But yeah, so hang around, and next time you'll hear about our day-to-day with them, and like kind of what they feel like, what they do, you know what I mean? So that was introductions of personal familiars. So any questions, find Cursed on social media. You can rate and review Cursed on anywhere you listen. That would be awesome. Check out Hex Files. That's my other podcast. Just got back. We're going to do an episode on the Dismal Swamp. We just got back from there. Had some crazy spirit box sessions, some synchronicities. We might have found a Bigfoot print. I'm just saying. You can go look at Hex Files Instagram. I've been sending it to people. We stopped by a researcher. You'll hear about all of our synchronicities in our story. And we're kind of like, is this like Hellier Light? Like, it kind of lines up. We've been talking to people like Brett Manning with synchronicities and just weird different stuff. She's one of our patrons, and her art's amazing, so you can check her out. We're plugging her. But yeah, you don't want to miss the stuff that happened in the Great Dismal Swamp with our spirit boxes and our Bigfoot.
You'd be surprised how much can come from, a foot-shaped print in the mud.
Right. And people are like, yeah, well, it looks like a footprint, but it's also cold and in a swamp in a national park with only one print around. So we'll get into that. But the episode I did with my friend Alex on aliens and like abductions, astral travel, shit like this, that's on Hex Files. So there's a reason you should go listen to Hex Files. And then, as you saw, the Hex Files episode was on Cursed. Did a little crossover. So don't think that Hex Files is back on Cursed, because it's not. But, it's the same. We know them. We know them from church. But that being said, follow Cursed. Send us your stories. Send me your stories through email, comment, whatever, because I want to hear if you have a working relationship with a familiar spirit. I'll have to talk to Cindy again. I did not get a chance to get into familiars with her that deep on when I had her on, because there's so much going on and to talk about. But yeah, the Familiars seems like a good series to have ongoing, because it's one of the biggest parts of my life and has been for a while. So of course I'm gonna have a bunch to say about Familiars.
Of course.
So until next time, thank you for listening. You can check out bonus episodes on our Patreon. I know those are a little bit behind, but that's because we had a trip. I do have those. I just have to get them edited and uploaded, but there'll be one with more missing people cases. Alex sticks around to talk about his abduction experience, whether or not it was physical, astral, just a dream. It's weird. It's definitely weird. So, and I will upload that picture on there that he drew of the beings that he saw. So check out the Patreon and tune in next episode for part 3. So
Yay.
Thanks to Clayton for being on. He'll be on the next one too.
Absolutely.
All right. Goodbye, you guys.
Goodbye.